panel, as well as all of the events that take place at Parks and Club this weekend, are taking place on the traditional land of the original inhabitants of this area, the Lenape. For over 10,000 years, the Lenape have been the stewards of this land, and we honor with gratitude this land, as well as the Lenape. So welcome to this panel, everybody. This panel is presented in part with support by Game to Grow. So Game to Grow is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the use of games of all kinds to support insight, growth, and change in community, educational, and therapeutic contexts. We're most well known for our therapeutic social skills groups that use Dungeons and Dragons, as well as Minecraft. Additionally, we have a training program where we teach therapists, educators, community members how to use games with their participants. Check us out on the Diversity Lounge. Thanks. It's a very interactive panel. It's fun. So, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and the Director of Education and Training with Game to Grow. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. So to test their working memory, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves with an introduction with multiple parts. So I'm looking for your name, your pronouns, your role in the organization you're with, how long you've been playing tabletop RPGs, and when you received your autism diagnosis. Jared, are you willing to start?
I'm going to go first. I'm Dr. Jared Kilmer. I am the Director of Counseling Services at Game to Grow. If you look at the slide in the bottom left, that's what my mouth and nose look like. I have been playing tabletop RPGs since 2014, and I've had my diagnosis of autism since early 2021. And my pronouns are he, him.
I need to working memory. I actually need to look at your notes now. So my name is Dr. Jared Kilmer, and I'm Dr. Raffael Boccamazzo. Everybody calls me Dr. B for long Italian name reasons, and I'm he, him, and I am a clinical psychologist in Washington State, along with these two, and I am the clinical director at takethis.org. We are here in the Diversity Lounge as well as the AFK room, which is right next door. It is the most boring room at the show by design. Go check it out. I have been playing TTRPGs since 1990.
Sorry, what was that?
Older than you. I think I started playing about 25 years ago.
Older than me.
Yeah, I know. Yes, I know. I think I've got injuries older than you.
Wither and die.
I think we shouldn't be next to each other. But I have been DMing almost as long, and I found out I was autistic apparently after everybody else knew, about 5 years ago.
I am Makenzie Armas, Makenzie Lady on Twitter. I have just realized I'm the only person on this panel who isn't a doctor.
Doctor.
Hi, it's me. I am an associate game designer for Dungeons & Dragons at Wizards of the Coast. I was a top-line writer for both the recent release Strixhaven, Curriculum of Chaos, as well as the upcoming book, Critical Role Presents Call of the Netherdeep. Before I worked at WotC, I was the lead writer for The Islands of Sina Una, which was published by Hit Point Press, who is over at the Exhibitors Hall, as well as one of the co-designers for MCDM's Kingdoms and Warfare. I have been playing D&D since about mid-2018. There was like a bit of a long break where I played my first game and then waited like 6 months and then started more consistently playing early 2019. I started DMing around mid-2019, and I got my autism diagnosis shortly after that in November of 2019. My pronouns are she, her.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And it's better if we don't have only doctors on the panel. It's not as interesting or as useful.
Well, we got to have some people who make good life decisions.
Yeah. It's very accurate.
I took school and I got my bachelor's, and then I went goodbye. No more. And then I joined Wizards, and immediately the first thing they gave me was, "You want to write about magical university?" And I went, "I just left. Why?"
That's awesome. So from some of the last nods I got around my working memory joke, much of our audience today may be pretty familiar with neurodivergencies like autism, but for those who are less familiar, what is autism? In 2 minutes as opposed to 6 hours.
Okay. So the colloquial metaphor that I like to use for autism, and part of the reason that we think about it differently than other diagnoses is a computer. It's an operating system. Because it's not like we wake up one day when we're 12 or 13 like the X-Men and oops, autism. We're born that way. And we're on a different operating system. I like to say I'm Linux in a Windows world. And while yes, we have to learn to interface with different systems, to expect us to be a Windows operating system, we're gonna run into some problems. Especially if we have to do it all the time, because our RAM is gonna get eaten up real quickly, AKA working memory. And so, but to get a little bit more technical, autism is a difference in communication, and we don't read nonverbal communication primarily the same way other people do, and we also have what are called repetitive and stereotyped interests and movements. We get really into certain things, like really into things, badly. But that, there's flip sides to that. But that's in a nutshell. Basically, we communicate differently. We don't recognize things the same way other people do. I think the neurotypical are weird, and they expect other people to understand what they say without saying it. That's so ineffective. But yeah, basically, Linux in a Windows world. That's the way I like to think about it, and it gets the point across really nicely.
Awesome, thank you. So why are tabletop RPGs such a great fit for so many autistic individuals?
So we have a lot of panelists here who have done a lot of panels, first of all. And secondly, we're like, I don't want to hog the conversation. You go, you go, you go. Makenzie, would you like to start this off?
Sure. I'll talk about why I got into tabletop games and why they seem to click with my brain. I think it's a combination of, when you're playing a tabletop game, there is a certain cadence to it. It is a repetitive cycle of play. You, like for example for D&D, what you do every time you want to do an action is you say the action you want to do, the DM hears the action and then goes, okay, in order to do this action you must do this. You must roll a blank check or something like that. Then that roll is made, that is resolved, and then depending on the result, which is delineated very strictly numerically and very binarily as a pass or a fail, that is how the story progresses, and then the cycle continues. Someone else wants to do something else, they make a check, so on and so forth. And that sort of repetitiveness really worked with my brain. I mentioned earlier, like, I did not do the doctor thing. I went to
Good
school.
for you.
I went to school for creative writing, and I remember having such a hard time because I couldn't write stories the way all my other classmates could, where it was a very linear sort of thing, and I was having this trouble trying to write a linear story because my brain just wasn't working like that. But when I started reading Dungeons and Dragons, and then I started creating for Dungeons and Dragons, that sort of modular idea of creating a tabletop space where you're not necessarily creating a linear story, but rather you are delineating the parameters of the world that you are putting people in. You are creating the sandbox for them to play in and giving them certain tools like little sandcastle modes and stuff. And that worked so well with my brain, and it really worked with how my brain sort of processes information. And it was also just really cool with how much you were able to put yourself into like the role-playing aspect of tabletop games. I got to make characters who reflected parts of me, and I didn't get to see that a lot in most fiction and most fantasy. I got to make characters who really felt like me and had aspects of myself, not just my autism and my neurodivergency, but being femme presenting, being person of color, all of those sort of, being queer, all of those sort of things. It was far easier for me to just make characters that echoed me way more clearly and felt more like me, and that felt really nice.
God, yes. Structure, framework. There's if you follow me on Twitter occasionally, we go from like, hey, cocktail recipe, hey, Dungeons and Dragons, hey, random shower thought, to keeping it real autism thread. And on one of those keeping it real autism threads, the metaphor I used for social interactions, when you don't necessarily understand the rules of typical social interactions, it's like sitting down at a card table. It's like a room filled with card tables, and you're sitting down and the rules are different at every table. And what's really obnoxious is that if you change players, the rules also change at the same table. And different dealers will be kind enough to try and explain certain rules to you. Some are better than others, but nobody can explain all the rules of each game. And it is so exhausting to do that all the time. And Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop RPGs offer a definitive structure and a way of exploring certain social interactions in a relatively consequence-free way. I mean, yeah, you can go ham and full murder hobo and get the other people angry at you, unless that's the game you're playing, in which case, have you tried Munchkin instead? But in a relatively consequence-free way, especially if you have the fortune of playing with players and a DM who you trust and allow you the space to safely explore certain things. Much like Makenzie, it allowed me to learn about certain aspects of myself. When I was a teenager, primarily, I mean, all my characters were charismatic, smooth-talking, and I was very much not. And then it was, sometime around age 23, unfortunately after college would have been a very different experience. I had this realization that, oh God, if I'm doing this in the game, those actions have to come from someplace. This is not my character, this is me generating that through my character. Maybe I could do this in real life. But learning the social scripts is a different matter. And so, yeah, TTRPGs offer that structure and that framework that, actually, quick show of hands, if somebody says go to a party and be yourself, how many of you freak out? Yeah, okay. But, hey, you want to play a game, here's a rule book. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, it's all of that, it's that structure and that framework, that's everything about it for me.
I think some of my answers are going to echo Makenzie and Roth's, but the first thing I wrote down on my notes, which I take throughout this panel to collect my thoughts, is control. I like that structure. I like understanding what the rule set is, how to expect the reaction I'm going to get from the people around me, which in the real world I can't always. It's a great opportunity to simulate behaviors and learn the outcomes of them. As a child, a lot of the behaviors I would do to interact, I learned from television, and if the laugh track cued at the same time, I knew that was good. But that didn't necessarily get me where I wanted to go all the time. Tabletop RPGs was a nice way to just try out new behaviors, learn how people react. The agreed upon rules is a safe space to navigate. It's nice to have shared experiences with others. I've had some very strong focus on the things that interest me. When I think about my obsessions, I feel like the same way I feel about a crush. I don't always have the opportunity to share them with other people. And so to create a story and an experience with other people who are there for the same purpose is hard to verbalize in how special that can be. I also really, really value meta communication, talking about talking. That doesn't come up in a lot of other games, and it comes up even more rarely in the real world, in my experience. And tabletop RPGs have this lovely structure between players and game masters, where you can repeat back, oh, you want to flirt with the dragon. That's what your intention is. Okay. We can go back and forth and refine and calibrate to make sure we are on the same page before moving forward. Time can slow way down or speed up as needed. I also have found in my own life, eye contact's kind of a funny thing. I don't value it highly. I see its purpose.
You understand the theoretical nature of its utility.
Yeah.
I know how to pretend to do it.
Do you look like right here?
No, I just look slightly over everyone's head.
Nice. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Oh.
So right now I can see nobody's faces, even if I'm trying to. Everything's happening in my head right now. I'm visualizing what I want to say next. It's very theater of the mind. So are tabletop RPGs in a way that behind a Dungeon Master screen, I'm not necessarily needing to make that same level of eye contact. We're all visualizing things in our head. And it take some of the stress of nonverbal communication away in a way that is unique.
I also want to bounce off something that both Raph and Jared said. I realized, because a lot of us mentioned like the idea of, oh, there's structure, there's a rhythm to the social interaction of playing these games. The other thing that I realized is that when we forget the rules, there is a concrete source
Oh God, yes.
that we can reference and remember the rules.
Oh, God bless the player's handbook.
Like, I don't remember the rules for Dungeons and Dragons, and I write the gosh darn game. But somehow in regular neurotypical society, we are expected to remember the rules for social interaction flawlessly. And there is comfort in knowing that we can pause a game and go, hold on, let me double check the rules for this. And even still, knowing the rules and knowing when they are flexible and when we can break them in order to still accomplish what we want.
Mm-hmm.
There is security in knowing that we don't have to know everything.
Well, and you said we have to know the rules for social interactions. I want to take that one further and say we're supposed to intuit the rules for social interactions. Like, I'm very thankful I had parents who were both very into teaching their children manners overtly. So you can take me to a fancy dinner, and I got that down. But you drop me in my college, and I'm like, what is party? Beer is what? What is keg? May we do thing to keg with pump and drink? That sounds dirty. Huh. Again, college would have been a very different experience for me.
Well, it sounds like the consequences for not knowing the rules in a game or messing up the rules in a game are going to be really different than not understanding, intuiting, or enacting the rules in a semi-structured or unstructured social environment.
Well, there's something that a lot of folks who are autistic are really good at, and that is what's called parallel play. And this is a developmental psychology concept where in normal development, that was from another mental health type. There's this supposed progression, which is incredibly Eurocentric. That you
Gotta go.
This is what happens when you have about 5 white dudes deciding psychology. But it's this idea that we begin with solo play, then we do parallel play, which is doing separate activities together, and then it evolves into cooperative play. A lot of us on the spectrum are really good at parallel play. Really good at parallel play. You want to do your thing next to me while I do my thing? That is heaven. You don't talk to me, I don't talk to you, and we just exist in the same space? Oh, yes. But when you get into like the cooperative play aspects of social interactions, because a lot of neurotypical social interactions are based off of, in real time, emotional and social reciprocity, where you have to mirror and mimic and give them back the emotional response that they want or expect. Yeah, we don't do that well. No.
So a couple of themes that I'm hearing. It sounds like some of the reasons why y'all enjoy tabletop RPGs so much, and they may be a really great fit for other autistic individuals, is that they're kind of this controlled, semi-predictable social space in which you can not only discover parts of yourself, but you also have more opportunities to celebrate those things, where the parts of your brain that might be different than a large population of your peers really fit in here and flourish and may make you a phenomenal player or a really, really good dungeon master. So that kind of brings me into my next question.
Wait.
Okay, sure.
Sorry. You described it as semi-controlled, and it sparked a thought. I want to share it before we move on. What I think is so special about semi-controlled spaces is that they're not overly rigid. We cannot expect every permutation of outcomes. It is providing a space to flexibly grow more comfortable with ambiguity in a safe manner.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And that still leads into my next question, because that's something where, if you're the GM, you're kind of responsible for moderating or being in charge of that space to some extent. So not all of you, or all of you are players and you're also GM. So what led you or what drew you into being game masters as opposed to just players?
I actually really want Jerry to go first for this because you've got a really good answer for this.
Oh, what have I said in the past that you liked? Just a keyword.
Control.
I mean, at the heart of it, I don't want to be too redundant, but control is what drew me to being a game master. I got a little bit more of like that safety net by being a player in a highly like structured game setting, but I still didn't necessarily know what my game master had up their sleeve, what to expect from the other players at the table, who was in what role. As the game master, I don't know everything, but I know so much more. I know what's on the next page or in the next chapter. I know what like the world looks like broadly. I have a different relationship with each player at the table, which provides me special insights into their goals as players or characters. And I feel like I could be rambling. Raf, is this what you were looking for?
Well, I like what you've said. We've done this panel a couple times, and I like what you've said in the past about that sense of control that you don't typically have outside of that game space. And you just hit on it with that idea that real life social interactions might be ambiguous, but your world is your world.
Mm-hmm.
You know what's going to happen in your world. You make the rules. You are the god.
And on rulemaking, it's nice that we have a player's handbook that does structure exactly what to expect, and it can be as rigid and crunchy as we need, but the game master at the end of the day gets to go, you know what, I didn't like that rule, or it doesn't look like the table really benefits from this rule, and we can flexibly create our new rules if we want to. And as a player, maybe this is a personal problem, I don't feel like I have that same authority.
I'm just realizing I have a very different DM style than I think both of you on this side of the table, where you're like, I know what's gonna happen and so much, and I'm like...
Less dissimilar than you think.
Probably. But like, I don't prep for my games at all. Zero prep. I have run an entire 20-story like tiered city using half a page on a Google Doc.
That was a fun game.
That was not the game I ran for you.
Seriously?
No, that one has less notes.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a full like 20-story tiered pirate city on this broken island. And I literally, the only notes I had was like, levels 1 through 5 are this, levels 6 through 10 are this, levels 10 through 15 are this, and levels 20 or something are this, and then that was it. And I ran like 3 or 4 games in that before that game died. It was good. But I mean, I do agree with the idea of like, liking that idea of control. But for me, I've always enjoyed it of, there is freedom in feeling like I don't have to know everything, in the opposite way. I am very much a perfectionist, neurodiverse person where I like to be perfect, I like to meet everyone's expectations, I like to be exactly what everyone expects of me at all times, and does that mean I'm me all the time? No, never, why? I'm also a burnt out gifted kid, wanted to be a theater kid, didn't work out. So Dungeons and Dragons works really well for me, when you're a burnt out neurodiverse former theater kid whose dreams got crushed. But I love that idea of like, you are not necessarily, you can be the god of the world, but at the same time, you're more just the referee of the table. Your goal is just to make sure you understand what everyone wants to do and facilitate that in the best way possible. And as for someone who is very much a perfectionist, people pleaser, burnt out gifted kid, it's so nice being the person who helps people have a really good time and tell the stories they want to tell. And just, there is such joy for me, because I have problems like reading people's facial expressions. I have comedic timing through sheer practice. But there is such joy in when you're playing around a table, you can tell when people are having fun. It is obvious. There are very much visceral reactions to fun around the table. And that is just really satisfying to know that I'm helping my friends have a really awesome time and tell the story they want to. And I don't know what's happening, and I don't always know what's happening, and sometimes they will surprise me and I'll just go, okay, yeah, sure, you can do that. I'm sorry, you wanted to do what? You wanted to ping, see invisibility, detect magic, comprehend languages, you wanted to put a magic circle down on the train? Okay, sure, yeah. Give me like 1 second to run through everything you just did that I definitely prepared for.
So one of the things that DMing allowed for me was the opportunity to create a space where I felt accepted. Going back to my Linux analogy, people, Makenzie's experience is reminiscent of many of our experiences that, especially a lot of the old school therapy, treatments for autism is essentially compliance therapy. Mm-hmm. And we're taught to do what's expected. And that gets exhausting so quickly. What is intuitive for other people, what is a background process for other people, is a manual operation for us. And when I've been with romantic partners and I've had to break it down, like how many steps I had to go through to understand that touch on the shoulder was a bid for my attention and I didn't recognize it and go through the process of that. It's romantic relationships that my autism is really obvious. But when I can create a world where my weird is normative, suddenly I'm in a place where I'm accepted in a way that the world doesn't. Mm-hmm. That my divergent thinking, which is incidentally a strength of a lot of us who are neurodivergent, aka creativity, I can create a world where that is okay and that's normative, and then people laugh, not at me, but with me for something I built. And that was a revelatory experience, being laughed with instead of at. And that's what DMing did for me.
I do want to butt in though, because all three of us have talked about why we like DMing and why our autism are our strengths for our DMing and where we sort of draw from our neurodivergency to have fun and run good games. I do always want to say whenever we do these panels, because I know Game to Grow does use D&D to help teach social skills and stuff. I always have to say that my journey with autism and my journey in tabletop spaces as a professional are always intertwined. Because the reason why I became public about my autism was because in the beginning of 2020, there was a very loud sect of people on the internet who were very definitively and aggressively saying that autistic people couldn't and shouldn't play D&D. That it was too social, that it was too flexible, and that we are rigid and that we cannot adapt to that sort of thing, and so therefore we do not belong in this space. And while I was not public about my autism at the time, I was working as a freelancer. I had written things for D&D Beyond, I was working for MCDM. I wasn't famous, but I was semi-prolific. And I realized at that moment that I needed people to know that we existed, and that we are good at this, and we can do this. And more than that, that our neurodivergencies, like we've been describing, aren't, how we approach the game is different due to our neurodivergencies, but that does not mean we approach the game any less competent than anyone else. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I started doing advocacy and stuff. That's how I ended up here, and it's always been weird because I know I don't look like how people think autistic people look. I'm very well aware of that when people think of autism or autistic people, they think of cis white guys who are really good at STEM. And I am...
Oh, no. 2 out of 3.
Yeah, 2 out of 3. Cis white guys who are brunettes and work in either math or science or medical fields and are like freaking geniuses at what they do, but are like laughably, comedically bad at social situations. Oh. And I don't know if anyone has noticed, I am not white, I am not a male, I don't work in STEM. I hope I'm funny, but people don't see me as autistic, and so I have to be loud about it. And here we are.
Well, and that, I mean, that's a huge problem in and of itself, because autism recognition and research is about 20 years behind where ADHD is. And even that is severely underdiagnosed in anybody who's not cis white dude. You know, that's partially why, you know, channels like How to ADHD have become as successful as they are, because, you know, Jessica approaches things from, hey, girls have autism too, non-binary, or ADHD as well. Non-binary folks have ADHD as well. And autism is even further behind in that finding a specialist who can diagnose adult autism in and of itself is rare. Finding someone who can effectively diagnose that in people with any sort of gender diversity or anything outside of the very narrow band of being white, that is even more rare. And so if you are a psych student right now, think about learning this and getting up on the research, because you're going to be the generation of folks who are going to fix that.
My favorite aside is that a lot of the stereotypical autistic traits that I exhibited when I was a kid, like being really good at math and science and numbers, it was always shoved under the rug as, oh, you're not autistic, you're just a really good Asian. Yeah.
Oh God.
Yes.
So
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there, and I didn't want the suitcase at all.
I was just gonna let that sit for a minute. He needs some space there.
Oh, you're such a therapist.
I mean, yeah.
I could add a few extra points as I'm warming up to this question, but they're jumping all around in the last 5 minutes. I'm gonna work backwards. So, I had this note written down: autism deficits. Things we might not be as good at our peers at. This one's funny to me because I think it sounds on the surface like a comment on like a skill ceiling, which I don't think it is. I think it's more of a comment on like an increased difficulty setting that we are playing this game on.
Ooh.
Thank you. What I have noticed, this is anecdotal, this is about myself, is growing up I did have lagging social skills. Social and emotional reciprocity was difficult for me. And as a function of that, once I gained some insight into it, put a lot of effort into learning how communication works. I even took college courses on like nonverbal communication, conflict resolution, things like that, learning how to use reflective listening. As a function of that, I think I'm better than a lot of my neurotypical peers at communication now. I can be more comfortably direct and accurate when I speak. Not perfectly, I hope I'm doing okay right now, but that is my full thought on that point. Moving on. Never said anything about segues or transitions.
Did you ever see that? Oh God, were you old enough to watch Animaniacs first when it came out?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Do you remember that kid? Oh God, you weren't.
Yeah, I gotta go. Yeah, I gotta go.
They had this interstitial skits where this kid would walk out of his house and okay, so one time Randy Beeman's mom was okay, bye, and he left, and that's every time I watch that I'm like, God, that kid's autistic.
Oh, you mean the new show that just came out on Warner Brothers, right?
I hate you so much right now. Youth is a temporary affliction. You will get over it.
You mean that new show that just came out? You brought me to my next point, Makenzie. What I like about tabletop RPGs is it does normalize asking for clarity. I'm not going to speak too long about that because I made that point, I think, 10 minutes ago. But I think that's really, really special. To, like, it's almost built in to be practicing reflective listening in that context. Makenzie, you also said something earlier that really jumped out at me. You were talking about like recognizing joy.
Yeah.
And that reminded me of my childhood, because when I couldn't read an expression, what I really mean by that is someone could say something or they could make a facial expression and I go, okay, noted, that might be one of 5 interpretations right now. And I need to do the mental math to guess which one in my head is correct. But joy was always the least ambiguous. And joy is manifested in these games so much more readily than I have seen in other kinds of shared experiences or gaming. And I've always found that very safe and attractive.
I mean, I'll even bounce off that, like, other expressions of emotions, like even tragedy or sadness or anger, are much more clearly communicated in a role-playing space, especially if you're using things like safety tools around the table. That ability to have a physical card or a tangible symbol to go, hey, are you all okay? Is everyone having fun? And giving them the tools to respond of, yes, I'm having fun, or I am having fun, but we are maybe approaching a line in which I will no longer be having fun. Let's just be careful, or I am not having fun, please stop. And similar to you, it's like I can't read facial expressions, and so when I'm talking with someone, it's always a weird matrix in my head of, okay, this is the face they're making, this is the tone of their voice. If I'm able to triangulate, I can approximate what they're feeling.
Is it an infographic in your head too?
It's more like an XY axis.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And so it's like, but with the safety cards, it's like I can, if people look, it is, and this is a function of me being socially anxious. If I see neutral expressions, I always default to they're mad at me. Oh no. But it's really good to have safety tools and just be like, hey, are we all having fun? Are we okay? And then people can unambiguously respond with yes, maybe, or no. And that's really helpful for me.
God, clarity is so cool.
I want to partially blame tabletop RPGs for helping me gain insight into when I'm making assumptions. We're making them constantly in that game, and we need to check in and clarify. In real life, I was making assumptions all the time, and I was just like, oh, that's reality right there. I don't need to think too hard about it. But as I gained that insight, I also gained some new language around it too. This is what I'm perceiving, just not the same as what reality is. And can you confirm that or correct that so that we can calibrate and get on the same page?
Yeah. So kind of jumping off of that, thinking about the way in which we will often follow up and ask clarifying questions in role-playing games more than we do in real life. Are there any boundaries you set or accommodations that you request with your groups to improve your experience? Which also is probably going to improve the entire group's experience, because that's how accommodations and accessibility works.
Yeah, it's different for everyone, so I'll speak to my personal experience. I know, based on how in previous discussions we've had, some of us don't like running games online. I really love running games virtually because of the function of I can very easily see everyone's face in a same sort of location, as well as I have a chat function where people while I'm talking to someone, they can drop messages, and so when people have thoughts, they don't have to interrupt the conversation. I don't have to juggle 5 different conversations at once, and that's really helpful. There's also a really weird one that I use, is I have to play music whenever I'm playing D&D, and I know that's for a lot of neurodiverse people that background noise is really hard. For me, if I don't have ambient background noise, I can't focus. So I found that virtual tabletops like Owlbear Rodeo or Roll20, where you can upload music, but then every individual player can control how loud that music is, has been really helpful to facilitate an environment where I can accommodate the different levels of attention and focus that my different players have. Some of my players are I cannot focus with music at all, or I'm I need to have that music in the background, otherwise I start losing track of things. And so being able to have music and then they can toggle individually what they want to hear has been really a surprising gift of the panorama we're in.
One of the things to note, if you are autistic in this room, or even if you're not autistic, it's something to note that cognitive profiles on those of us who ADHD, autism, think about it like a character sheet, okay? people who are neurotypical, they tend to have more flat profiles in that, their strength, their dex, their working memory are all roughly in the same range. Whereas those of us who are neurodivergent, ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, we tend to have spikes and valleys. So it's a question of knowing what you're good at and knowing what you're less good at. And for me, I very rarely can run online games because sensory sensitivities. I cannot tune out certain things, especially voices. I'm so tuned into human voices that when my players are whispering to each other or there's crosstalk, in real life, generally, I can ignore it or tune it out. When it's online, it all comes in with the same degree of salience, and I was getting real cranky with my players, and they did not deserve that because that was a me issue. So we actually didn't play online for a year and a half, and we got to run our first in-person game last weekend, and it was so cool. It was so great. And as an addition, this is just pure bragging at this point because this is just happy moment, feel good moment. 2 of my players are married, and they were high school sweethearts, and they're gross, and I hate them. And their now 16-year-old daughter, I can't believe Bella's a cheerleader, oh my God. No one saw that coming from that little goth kid. But she joined us at the table for the first time last week, and it was so adorable to watch her and her dad get antagonistic.
I think that, like, just noting the difference between our answers, it's very important to note that even though all of us are on the autism spectrum and do have autism, how it manifests in all 3 of us is widely different.
So different.
And so the things we say on this panel and the things that we highlight and the things that we find that we're really good at and the things that we struggle with are going to be different between all of us, and they're going to be different between all other autistic folks.
Well, and that's why I pointed out that cognitive profile thing, because when you're interacting with, even if you're autistic or if you're not autistic and you're interacting with those of us who are autistic, understand that how it's going to manifest is very different for each person, and it's like dealing with a D&D party. You don't throw the wizard on frontline combat at level 1. It's hilarious to watch a house cat take him out, but yeah, you got to be aware of individual differences in the folks you're around.
Our proficiency bonuses are all kind of all over the place.
Oh, so random. Oh God, the grog of substantial whimsy was present from the moment of my birth.
I think when I'm thinking of boundaries and accommodations, I'm going to go back to communication again. When I'm playing a game, a tabletop RPG, I'm playing that with those around me for a lot of time. Whether that is professionally or like friendly, it's hours worth of a one-shot or it is months worth of a campaign. And so even though I want certain accommodations in every human interaction, it's not always worth it to go the extra mile and ask for them on ones that I know are going to be kind of short-lived. These are not going to be short-lived, often, at least in my own experience. The phrase can I trust you to tell me is, in that sentence, however you want, is very important to me. Am I being too annoying, or am I being too loud, or my ideas a little bit too out there? I want to fit in. I do. If I'm bothering you, will I get to know about it? If I can't trust that, that's an accommodation I kind of need. I also just self-care. It's not that specific, but I think it's very important. Even just the cadence of our sessions, how long are they going to last for? How frequently are we going to meet? That matters. And in a game or any hobby that you can get very obsessed with, like I can, it can get away from you. You can accidentally, zealously schedule too many 6-hour sessions before it imposes on you. Oh yeah?
6-hour sessions?
That's how Elizabeth and I got to know each other.
We don't do those anymore. 6 hours is too long.
It's so long, though. Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, back in the day, it'd be from lunch to dinner time. Our friends would get together. And having lived through that, we don't do that anymore. This is really great.
I had somebody ask me last year to do a charity game on Christmas. or New Year's Eve for 6 hours streamed. I was like, thank you, I cannot do that.
It's been really, like, speaking of the time thing, so interesting how I approached D&D and how I started DMing. The majority of my DMing journey was on stream. So my very first long-term campaign is entirely on the internet for people to watch. That's terrifying. I learned how to DM in front of an audience. I think I've only DM'd a couple of games just by myself without people watching. And that has very interestingly influenced that sort of style and that cadence. Because when you're playing on stream, you have a set time block. And when you're playing on stream, you have a set, we play for this long, we have a 15-minute break in the middle, and then we play until that time block ends, and then we shut the stream down and we go crash and I go sleep for an hour. And it's almost never occurred to me that, like, home games don't do that. Because when I run my games privately, I'm way more conscious of time because of that. And I just find that super interesting.
Where are the Cheetos? I'm home!
It to me, I don't eat when I play because it's near my electronics and I am afraid of my clumsiness.
That's fair. We've got a little bit less than 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we leave some time at the end for questions. But before we do that, y'all have given a ton of advice today. I'm sure the people in this audience, who's feeling heard and validated today? Can I get a show of hands? Excellent. So,
yeah.
But before we move into that Q&A, is there kind of one final piece of advice you would like to leave the audience with today?
For me, can I go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Get more comfortable failing. It's the coolest and most important thing you could do. If I have a skill that I have mastered, it's because I'm standing on a mountain of failures to have figured out how to calibrate and work my way up to that. And before I was comfortable failing, I just didn't do things. I lost out on a lot of experiences and a lot of opportunities to build that skill. As a therapist, I often tell my clients, please don't do it right. Explain it poorly. Try it suboptimally. Just get some rehearsal in. And the more we practice, the more we're going to be able to increase our modifiers when we roll the dice, because we can't guarantee anything, but we can do as much as we can to maximize success.
You're technically next.
Oh, I did. Oh, we're going in an order. Okay. Yeah, similarly to what Jared just said, learn what you, no pun intended, learn what you bring to the table. Okay. Learn what your strengths are, because what you do well is maybe not something I could do well. It's maybe not something B. Dave Walters could do well. And Lord knows what B. Dave can do, nobody else can do. Because that, if Vincent Price was reincarnated, that B. Dave is amazing. But just get comfortable with what your strengths are, because nobody can be the DM that you are. And there is unique value to that and unique joy in that, because you're gonna come up with something that nobody else will. And yeah, you're gonna fail in the process, but you're also gonna create truly unique experiences just by leaning on what you do well. And then sidestep the stuff you can't do as well. It's your world, you can, don't need to do that.
I think mine, it's a little bit of autism advice and a little bit of DM advice, is that I always look at the assumption and the often comical notion that the DM is supposed to be the god of the world and know everything and be omnipotent and omnipresent, and that's so stressful to me. And so when you're DMing, at least for me, I always find it important to remember that you don't have to know everything, and it's okay to not know something. It's okay to reference rules again. It's okay if your players surprise you and you're like, I didn't prepare this. And it's totally okay for you to just say that and say, I was not ready for this. Give me a moment. Or if you don't want to take that moment to stop, just being like, I don't know, what do you see? Describe the room to me. Describe something about this. Who do you find behind the bar counter? You want to go to a bookstore? Cool. Describe the bookstore to me. Who runs it? What does it look like? There is fun and freedom in collaborative play. In knowing that you are not responsible for everything, and that you have that freedom, like others, like you two were saying, to fail and to not know and to discover together. And I think there is a lot of good that can be extrapolated from that, from beyond the table and going into real life, where life is a collaborative sport and we're all working together to tell a really awesome story in the end. And it's okay to lean on your other adventurers and go, I can't do this, can you? And that's good.
That sounds communist.
So I'm going to go ahead and invite anybody who has questions to go ahead and come forward to the mic. We do have a little bit less than 10 minutes left, and so I am going to ask that you keep your questions relatively short and without a lot of story, just so that we can make sure to get to as many people as possible. I'm also going to encourage y'all to, again, check out the AFK room, as well as take this and Game to Grow in the Diversity Lounge, which is also a relatively chill area of the con. Come on forward to the microphone.
You go ahead, I want to be first.
All right. Hi, hello. I'm Alex. Nice to meet you. I was so fascinated by what you said about meta communication. That really stood out to me, thinking about how we do that in RPGs. And I'm just wondering if you maybe could talk a little bit more about your experience with meta communication, maybe ways that you have practiced it in the past, or advice for other dungeon masters for ways to encourage that meta communication as a learning tool and a safety tool.
Oh, thank you. I feel so seen. It's like my favorite thing to talk about. But if I could plug a few things around meta communication, what we're talking is talking about talking and making that normal. One of the first things I would recommend is practicing reflective listening, which is laborious. It's harder than like regular speech, but also I think the payoff is higher. What I think I just heard is blank. And I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, like it's kind of like I perceive this is happening. Can you confirm that what I heard is the message you intended to send? And if not, what am I missing? How do we calibrate and get on the same page?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dylan.
Hello.
Kind of, we're slightly to the side of this, but how do you handle competing access needs at your table? Like if one of your players has like a directly opposite need to you, what do you do?
I mean, the situation is always individual for every player and every table. Something I like to do when it comes to things like that is very much do like session zeros and really check in with people, having that even multiple times where before we start playing, we just sort of get together and go, okay, how do we play? How do we want to have fun? How do you have fun? And how do I have fun? And how can we have fun together in ways that don't impact or directly oppose other people's fun? For example, what I like to do before games is I give people like a safety checklist. If you've seen like the Monte Cook Games safety checklist, that's a very good reference. For mine, it's a little bit of a sliding scale where I have like, instead of just red, yellow, green, it's 2 shades of red, 3 shades of yellow, and then like 2 shades of green. So I can calibrate on a sliding scale where people need to be and what topics are okay and what topics aren't. I also really do active check-ins with my players. Not too much to like where they're like, please just stop talking to me, but where I'm just like, hey, yeah, feel free to tell me as a DM like what was good, what wasn't. If you had an issue, we can fix it. I also like just having very flexible canon, where it's like we can retcon pretty much anything if it wasn't fun for you. But when it comes to, and then like also I mentioned with technology, like with the sound and stuff, having virtual tabletops that allow individual toggling has also been really helpful. But mostly communicate and ask and be willing to, it's not going to be an easy solution every time, but there are, just work together with them to figure out how you can have fun and reach the same goal that you both want in ways that don't impede the other.
Transparency is your friend there.
Yep.
One of the programs I used to work with, we would, and this is in the same vein of an ounce of prevention, and we would, and transparency, because we would just be really honest about the fact that some of the like teenagers coming in, there were differing needs that were diametrically opposed, and really rigidly diametrically opposed. And in that case, we had the luxury of having multiple groups where we were able to say, okay, so little Timmy 1 is not a good fit for this group because they need X, Y, and Z, and little Timmy 2 is not, they just can't be in the same group together, because what is comforting for one is nails on the chalkboard for the other. And so let's see if we can find a solution to that meets everybody's needs in a really non-judgmental way. This is not a good or bad thing, this is just what everybody's needs are, and let's see if we can find a group that fits. And it's just logistics.
There is no moral value to accessibility, it just is.
Thank you. So we have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to move us into lightning round. So 1 question and then 1 answer from one of our panelists.
And we will be in the hallway afterwards for
Yes.
elaborations and more questions.
Yes.
All right, okay. Whew. So something I love about D&D is the player's curiosity builds the world. What they ask for or what they look for is what is. But what do you do when that doesn't line up for what you're currently kind of fixating on? In terms of like what they're curious about is not the 500 years of politics you have discovered and been studying about this one city.
May I take this one?
Do it for it.
So what I do, one thing is to communicate. As a DM, you're still a player.
Yeah.
You want to. You are also supposed to have fun. So communicating to your players, hey, I like this elements of this game. These are things that I like, so that they have that expectation of, oh, so you enjoy doing this. You can get into it. The other thing I like doing is just bringing it into the game and just having them encounter it no matter what. So one of my very esoteric fixations right now is the theological idea of relative inclusivism, which is no one wants to hear about that. But what I've been doing is that in my home game, my players have just been encountering gods and theological constructs. They don't necessarily know they're encountering gods or theological constructs, but I do, and that means I'm having fun. And I'm getting to share relative inclusivism with my players, and they don't know it, but I am enjoying my hyperfixation.
All right, so trick them into it. Thank you.
Hello. So I am a forever DM by choice, and I'm autistic, and my entire table is where everyone's on the spectrum and either has ADHD or something like that. I like to build vibrant worlds that include what reflects what my table has, and there's also podcasts where my listeners listen to, but I don't want to, like you said before, I am one section of being autistic, but it's a completely different experience for someone else, but I want to have the world filled with these different people that have that as well. What are ways that I can kind of be inclusive without like appropriating or doing anything like that?
Oh, I mean, I just answered the other one, but if you want me to do
No, this is
All right.
so in your wheelhouse.
Oh, yeah. So one way to do it, like I said, is when it comes to world building and encountering people, ping the ideas off to your players, because even if all your players are on the neurodivergency spectrum, they're all going to have different experiences, and those are going to intersect with their lived experiences being of different marginalized genders or marginalized backgrounds, and so on and so forth. So being able to say, what does this shopkeep look like, or what are helping them, giving them the tools to invent and create the world with you is something that I have found really rewarding in terms of bringing more representation in my world. The other thing is just, man, every time I write my worlds, everyone is like queer, person of color, and neurodivergent, unless explicitly said not to be. And that's just me operating as a marginalized individual out of spite. Which is how it be. But like, even when it comes down to that, it's like, my autism is a sliding scale some days, and so when it comes to even making multiple autistic characters, I ping on the different things where my autism, how it manifests. So I'll have like a Kenku who's really good at mimicking sounds, and that's my echolalia taking form. And then on a completely other side, I'll have a entirely nonverbal shopkeep who is still sassy and brazen, but just doesn't really like verbally speaking. Those are 2 separate, diametrically opposed elements of my autism, but they still can coexist in me, and that means they can coexist in my fantasy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all so much for coming. We are at time, but we promise we will go out into the hallway and are happy to answer questions. So we'll see you all there. Don't forget to rate this panel if you found it